Hello and welcome back to ladensercrotchets. My name is Liz, and in this tutorial we're going to make this maxi skirt with a long slit. I hope you enjoy making this skirt as much as I did. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, and let's get into the tutorial. To work this skirt, you're going to need the full length of your skirt, and this is a max skirt, so you're going to measure from your waist all the way down to your ankle, I think. So I'll be working a skirt that has a full length of, I'll go with 43 because it's not as long as I want it to be. So I'll go with 43 inches for the full length. Then you're going to need to measure from your waist up to the point where you want the slit to start. So for this one, it starts at 13. I'll go up to 15. So full length of 43, a slit that goes up to 15 inches from my waist. And then you're going to need the measurement of your hips. So for this one, without stretching, the hips go up to 18. If I stretch this out, it stretches a lot, this skirt. And it goes up to around 23. 23 multiplied by 2 is 46. So get those three measurements. Those are the main measurements that you're going to need. The full length, the length up to the slit, and the hip measurement. And then we're going to work the skirt lengthwise, like our foundation chain is going to represent the length of the skirt. I'll use a medium weight yarn to work on this project. You'll need a 2.5 millimeter crochet hook. The smaller the hook, the better. If you have a 2.0, you can work with that because you need stitches that are close together so that you do not have a skirt that is too transparent. If you use a bigger hook, then your skirt is definitely going to be transparent. You're going to need a measuring tape to take your measurements, a darning needle for weaving in the ends, and a pair of scissors. Begin with a slip knot. Then you're going to make a chain that is long enough to fit the full length of the skirt that you're making. Make sure that your chains are not too tight and not too loose. So I'll begin making my chains. I did a total of 200 chains, and I'm going to measure this to see whether I've gotten the length of my skirt. And when you're measuring the length, you do not stretch. So measure the length of your chain without stretching and see whether you've gotten the full length of the skirt that you want to work. So this is what I'm going to do. So I'm just measuring, making sure that I'm not stretching out my chain. And once I do that, I'm going to get to 44 inches. And I needed 43. So 44 will be okay for me. I can do with one extra inch. So then once you're satisfied with the length of your chain, you're going to chain one and go into the second stitch with a half double crochet. One half double crochet. Then do 14 more for a total of 15. One into every stitch. So 1, 2. Half double crochets, 3, 4, 5, So I'm done with the 15 half double crochets, and this part represents the waistband of the skirt. Then the next stitch is going to get a double crochet, yarn over, go into the next stitch, pull 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through the remaining 2. Each of the remaining stitches to the end gets 1 double crochet. You might want to mark at the end of the half double crochets in order to make sure that you don't forget where the half double crochets end or begin. So maybe get a stitch marker and mark this point right here. I'll do that later. So I'll just continue with the double crochets to the end of row 1. I'm done with the first row. I'm at the end right here after doing the double crochets. I've also gotten a stitch marker and marked the end of the half double crochets. That is the end of the waistband at this point. So this stitch marker is at the 15 stitch mark. Then I'm going to need to measure from this side of the waistband and measure 15 inches. Remember I said my slit is going to be at the 15 mark inch. So I'm measuring from this point on the waistband all the way to where I have 15 inches right here, and then I'll mark that point. Get another stitch marker and mark that point. You're measuring without stretching, so make sure that your work is not stretched out when you're measuring the length or the full length. So that's what I have. Now I'll begin working row 2. To work row 2, we begin with a chain of 4. Sorry, begin with a chain of 3, 2 and 3. That's our first double crochet in the first stitch. Then yarn over, go into the next stitch and work a double crochet. Then chain 1 and skip the next stitch. Then work a double crochet into the next. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, work a double crochet into the next stitch, like that. So we're going to be creating these gaps. Chain 1, skip, we skip in this, working a double crochet into the next one. Chain 1, skip the next stitch and work a double crochet. And this is what we're going to repeat until we get to where we have our first stitch marker. Make sure that when you chain in, your chains are not too tight, because you don't want this row to look different from the other one. So don't make the chains too tight. I've worked row 2 to this point right here, and I just have one chain. Then I'll skip and work a double crochet into the stitch marker. And then I'll mark that point where I pulled out the stitch marker. Continue marking that point. Now we're going to work one double crochet till we get to the stitch before the stitch marker right here. One double crochet into every stitch without skipping. At the stitch marker right here, so I'll pull it out and work half double crochet into that stitch. One half double crochet, then mark the stitch again, then continue to the end of row 2 with one half double crochet into every stitch for a total of 15 half double crochets. I'm at the end of row 2, so we begin row 3 by chaining 1 and turning. Then we're going to work a half double crochet into every stitch till we get to where the stitch marker is. Normally on the waistband I usually work on the back loops, but for this particular project I'll be working in the both loops, even in the waistband. At the stitch marker, place a half double crochet and continue marking the stitch. Then now we change to double crochets till we get to the next stitch marker. 1 double crochet into every stitch. We place a double crochet on the marked stitch and mark the stitch again. Now we are at the chain 1 gap right here, so into that gap we place a double crochet, then a double crochet on top of the previous double crochet, a double crochet into the gap, and then a double crochet on top of the previous double crochet, and then a double crochet into the gap. And this is basically what we're going to repeat till we get to the end of row 3. At the end, we have 2 double crochets remaining, and you need to make sure that you work on those 2 double crochets. So this is the second last, place a double crochet there, and then we're going to place a double crochet on top of the first chain 3 stitch to complete row 3. We chain 3 and turn to begin row 4, and row 4 is the same as row 2. So the first stitch is a double crochet, we skip this one, we move to the next stitch with a double crochet, and then we're going to chain 1, skip the next stitch, work in the next stitch with a double crochet, chain 1, skip the next one, and work a double crochet next, chain 1. So row 2 is the same as row 4, row 6, row 8, and so on. So all the even rows will be worked the same. All the odd rows will also be worked the same, and we just alternating between row 2 and row 3 until you get your hip measurement. So I'll work a few more rows while alternating between this row and this other one, and then I'll come back and show you how to measure the hips. So that means if this row is going to be a skipped row, the next row is going to be a solid row, whereby you have double crochets all the way from the top to the bottom of the skirt. But then ensure that at the top of the skirt you have the half double crochets, just to ensure that the waistband is you can differentiate between the main part of the skirt and the waistband. So work your rows. I'll work about 10 rows, then I'll be back to show you how you measure in order to determine whether you're getting closer to your hip measurements. I've gone ahead to make 16 rows, and this is what I have. As you can see, this is the waistband. This is the part that is fully covered, and this is the extension all the way to the heel. And now I'm going to take the hip measurement. I'm going to show you how to measure the hips. So you hold your work like this, and then measure this part. You're going to measure this part, not the waist part, this particular part here. So without stretching, my work goes up to 7 inches, and then I'm going to give this a bit of a stretch, not too much, because you don't want your stitches now to open up too much. So when I stretch this, it goes up to 10.5. And this is how you're going to be measuring until you hit your hip measurements. So go on, continue with the rows. There isn't much that you're doing, like you're only repeating those 2 rows until you measure this part and you've hit your hip measurements. I went on to make a total of 78 rows for in order to achieve my hip measurements, and I'm going to measure these just to confirm that I've hit the measurement that I wanted. And I'm folding these into two, then get the measuring tape and take the measurement of the hip part of the skirt, and without stretching, this goes up to 17 and it's folded into two, so that's 34. If I give this a stretch, it goes up to 22 inches right there after stretching. And I was working a hip measurement of 43 and 22 is 44, and so an allowance of 1 inch is quite okay, and therefore I'm done with my skirt. When you're ending your skirt, make sure that you end with a solid row of double crochets. So I ended at this point with a solid row of double crochets, and then I chained one at this point and cut off the yarn. Next, we're going to join these two parts together up to this point, and then we're going to leave the other part for the slit. And so you need to ensure that you've aligned the stitches on each of the sides of the skirt. So these end, the stitch on this end, the first stitch with the first stitch on the other end, the second with the second on the other side, and so on. And I'm going to be joining these stitches with single crochets. Put the hook through the first stitch of one side and through the first stitch on the other side, then grab a loop of the strap of the yarn, that is a loop of the yarn, and then chain one. I'm going to be working over this tail just to hide it, so we're going to go into the next stitch and the other stitch on the other side and join with a single crochet into the next stitch and the third stitch on the other side, join with a single crochet, the fourth stitch with the fourth stitch on the other side, and then join with a single crochet. Do that for the next stitch and for the next. Then we're going to repeat this, joining the corresponding stitches with single crochets until we get to this point right here. At this point, I'm done joining the two parts of the skirt, and so I'm going to chain one and cut off the yarn to complete that part. Pull through and fasten. Then we're going to turn the skirt to the right side. And so this is the front part that goes above on your lap, and then this is a slit that goes all the way down to the heel. So at this point the skirt is done. All that's left is to weave in the tails, and then after weaving in the tails, you can work a strap to attach on the waist. If the waist is a bit bigger than your waist, then you can attach a strap onto it. But if the waist fits well on the waist, that is, if the skirt waist fits well, you do not have to attach the strap.